Okay, good evening. Today we are moving on with the 3.4.7.1, that is the strategies for sequencing elicitation activities. Previously, we did talk about the plan for elicitation. So we started plan for elicitation and now we are continuing with it. This is all part of the business analysis planning. Although the requirement collection and requirement elicitation and all that will come later in the subsequent chapters, domains. So we are now talking about the strategy for sequencing elicitation activities. Okay, where to start elicitation requirement often poses a challenge. So from where you have to start collecting the information, start collecting and gathering the requirements, that poses a great challenge. Business analysts know they need to acquire a lot of information. They are constrained by project timeline. Their stakeholders have a limited number of hours to dedicate to the project, and stakeholders have business knowledge and expertise in specific areas. All of these factors need to be considered to determine the optimal sequence for conducting elicitation activities. So we do understand that all the information about the requirements have to be sought from the stakeholders, and various stakeholders have got different expertise. They have got they are constrained for time. They have got their own problems. They cannot dedicate all their time for the project. Still, project manager has to play this game of elicitation very intelligently, as if he can take their minimum time and get maximum out of them. So there are a number of strategies the business analyst may consider when determining which areas of requirement elicitation to address first. Suggested areas of focus are where there are significant amount of business value to be gained. This is a very new technique, and that is only spend your time and money in those things which bring maximum business value. So if you can identify where is the maximum business value, you can target that first, because then it will yield more benefits earlier. So that is exactly how we can, focus on collection of the information. Then we have to see where there is greater risk. So maybe we can uh, decide to avoid the risk and go for those areas which are less risky, or we can decide otherwise depending upon the type of project we are dealing with. Many project unknowns or uncertainties. If there are a lot of uncertainties, then probably we have to know things in more detail. We have to ask more questions. So where there are more uncertainties, we have to spend more time with those stakeholders. Significant technical challenges, then we have to talk to the technical people. If the problem is more technical in nature, then we have to spend more time with the technical people. Dependencies on other components or interfaces, naturally there would be a sequencing link between the components. One thing has to be done, then other has to be dependent on that. So if there is any dependency visible to us, we have to recognize that and then flow with the path of the dependency in the sequence which is suggested by the system. Required third-party resources that the project is dependent on, and limited number of resources are a risk that a key resource may leave the project or company. So we have to consider all these factors and then focus on whatever is more important for us. I am not saying that you have to do all these things in this sequence. This is not the sequence. This is just considerations. You may focus on any one of them in any order as per requirement of your project. Other constraints could also be there that affect elicitation sequencing, like the dates key stakeholders impose on the project. These are the date constraints, fixed constraints, that this job must be done by this date. For example, plant shutdowns are seasonal constraints where stakeholders are committed to the operational work of the business before the work of the project. So while we are doing establishing the strategies for sequencing elicitation activities, uh, project manager and the business analyst have to have some collaboration point. So when they are deciding the order of business analysis activities, project manager and business analyst should work together to determine how resource availability will impact sequencing decisions. We do understand that if a specific resource is not available at a specific time, then probably certain activities cannot be done. So rather than focusing only on the technical aspect of what comes next, we must also see, do we have resources for that? So for that, project manager and business analyst may have to coordinate and collaborate. Next is the plan for analysis. Planning for analysis occurs at a high level in much the same manner as elicitation planning. You understand, we have so far talked about the elicitation. We have collected the data. Previously we planned, now we collected the data. We are doing all the planning. Now we are planning how this data we have collected is to be analyzed. So I am still doing the business analysis planning. I planned for the collection of data and now I am talking about how to analyze it. The business analyst will begin to think about which analysis techniques will be best suited to meet stakeholder and project needs. Although it is not necessary to call out each and every analysis technique that may be used, the business analyst should start to think about how the analysis work may be performed and determine the tools, templates, or training that need to be acquired prior to the start of the actual work. So, um, all the analysis tools and techniques available in the market are not to be used there, but naturally we do understand that we will have to select appropriate analysis tools and techniques, and they will be used judiciously during this process. And we must select them and we must lay down the whole system, how the analysis will be done, what tools and techniques, when they will be used, how they will be used, because this is our plan for analysis and we cannot get into the actual work of the project without having this plan. There are a number of analysis techniques to choose from, and each technique has its own strengths and circumstances where each is best used. At the planning stage, business analyst does not have sufficient information to know all of the analysis techniques that will be used. Since it is unknown as to what type of information the elicitation activities will produce, at the planning stage, the business analyst is just starting to think about how to approach the analysis activities, and much of what is considered here may change as the elicitation activities proceed. Planning for analysis is iterative and occurs throughout the project. And as we do understand the concept of progressive elaboration, so you will do your best in selection of certain tools and techniques, but naturally your selection will not be final, because until and unless that elicitation happens, you cannot really say that exactly this is my plan of analysis. So you do establish a framework, an outline, which may refer to certain tools which can be used, but later on when you are doing the elicitation itself, then the things might change and you may have to amend your analysis plan and introduce new tools and techniques. But you have to have a starting point, and therefore in plan for analysis you will have a very clear mind as to move ahead in the further process. Okay. Then is the define the requirements prioritization process. Yes, yes, please. Hold on. Ji, now.
Paragraph. Right. So I haven't heard anything from you in last paragraph. I'm talking about the PMI. Can you please repeat me the second paragraph? There are a number of analysis techniques to choose from.
I was saying that there are a number of analysis techniques and tools which can be used. But when we are planning for analysis, all the facts may not be available to us, and therefore we can just plan in approximation. We can say when the elicitation will happen, that will dictate what tools and techniques will be used, but I have selected a general approach for analysis and finalized it. Later on, when new facts surface, when I do the elicitation activities and new information is there, then based on that information, I can change my planning strategy, my tools and techniques and amend my plan. Do you get the point?
Yes.
So that was about the plan for analysis. Next is define the requirements prioritization process. Okay, prioritizing requirements is an important step. You see, we have collected the information, we have planned the analysis. Now we are talking about prioritizing the requirements. And naturally, what is the purpose of prioritizing the requirements? Can you tell me? Why do you want to prioritize the requirements? Oh, hold on. I think your mic is off. Yes.
So I was not able to hear from you your last sentences. Because this
I
new
was
slide, I cannot hear anything on this.
Okay. I was saying, why do we want to prioritize the requirements? We have all the requirements, we have analyzed them. Why do we want to prioritize them?
Second, alright, can you please repeat from the question which you have been asking me that we have analyzed what what I've got the idea I've got is that you are asking me a question that after doing the plan analysis, why do we need to prioritize the requirements?
Yep. Yep.
Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Why we need it? For me, it's a very important step to perform because basically we need to prioritize the requirements in which the most demanding requirement we have to fulfill it earlier so that the customer satisfaction can be achieved from the beginning. And as far as we progress in the project and other product work, it can be fulfilled accordingly.
Excellent. Excellent. That is exactly the purpose that we want to prioritize those requirements on top which are most urgent and which will yield the maximum benefit to the customer as if the stakeholder satisfaction can be achieved more and earlier. So there are many ways to prioritize requirements. Therefore, the business analyst determines which approaches are going to be used on the current project. To minimize conflict during the requirement prioritization activities, business analysts should define the process for establishing priorities before the requirements are elicited. So at this stage, when we are planning, we must define how will we prioritize the requirement, because we understand there are many ways to prioritize the requirement. You can, approximately prioritize a thing. You can think it from your own mind. You can do some kind of survey and prioritize things. Maybe your stakeholder strategy, management strategy, that dictates which stakeholder is more important and which requirements are more important. So setting expectations early with the stakeholders helps to minimize the situation where stakeholders become unhappy when their requirements are prioritized to the bottom of the list. So when you are prioritizing the requirements, involve the stakeholders, get them involved in the project, in the analysis, as if they know and understand why their requirement is placed where it is. So if their requirement is going down to the stack, then they must understand why their requirement is not that important for the project. Business analysts will find themselves leveraging their negotiation and conflict management skills heavily during prioritization discussions. When building the business analysis plan, the business analyst should include an explanation as to how prioritization will be conducted for the project. Some common factors to consider when defining the prioritization process are, for example, when requirement prioritization will occur. When should this prioritization will occur? Naturally, after all the requirements have been gathered. The likelihood that priorities will change. There is definitely a likelihood that over the period of time, stakeholders change, then why not the priorities? So priorities may also change. And if they change, we will have to reorder the requirements. Stakeholders who will be involved in the prioritization process. Naturally, we can't have all the stakeholders sitting down there. Yes, yes, please.
Right, sir. Is this process going to be performed throughout the project? See,
Of
as you
course,
have said very rightly, that the stakeholders can be changed throughout the project. So as the priorities of the project as well. So do the business analyst has to keep track or monitor the business priorities accordingly throughout the project, or it's done at the beginning of the project only?
he is going to be involved throughout the life of the project. That is exactly what we need to understand. That business analysis role does
So,
not finish with the start of the project. Business analyst is
right.
involved throughout the life of the project and even beyond.
So that I agree. That I agree. But my point is, that is this process is going to be an iterative one throughout the project?
Yes,
The prioritization requirement process?
exactly. What he can do is he can share some responsibilities with the project manager. That is a collaboration point. But as far as reprioritization of the requirements is concerned, that definitely remains with the stakeholder, with the business analyst. You see, the role of product owner in Scrum. Do you understand that role?
Yes, sir.
So what does that product owner do and what is he responsible for? He has to keep the prioritization of the requirements of the user stories in order. And he keeps doing that. Okay. Then next is techniques that will be used for prioritization. How will he be prioritizing those requirements? And then the criteria that will be used to prioritize them. And ultimately stakeholders who will approve the prioritization decision. So naturally, we will have certain stakeholders who are more important. They would be sitting together. They will also be involved in the prioritization process, and there will be certain stakeholders who will ultimately be sitting on top to approve the prioritization decision. And that is how our requirement prioritization process will go on. The project life cycle influences the prioritization process and often dictates the frequency, timing, and techniques for performing prioritization. As you said, frequency, how is it a continuous process? Yes, it is a continuous process. The frequency, how often should you be looking back at the prioritization and redoing it? What would be the timing? What would be the techniques at various stages? For example, adaptive life cycles use prioritization techniques for each iteration. So after every sprint, you reprioritize your requirements in order to determine the features to be provided in the next release of the product, that is the next sprint. Projects using predictive or waterfall life cycle will conduct prioritization upfront before product construction begins. Priorities may still shift in a waterfall project, but incorporating such changes is more difficult than in a project following an iterative development cycle. Because iterative development cycle or agile cycle is made for this purpose. This is made for changes. Although in a predictive life cycle it will be slightly difficult because we already know all the facts and most probably there will be not much of change throughout the life of the project. So if you want to make any change in stakeholder or the priorities, that is comparatively difficult in a waterfall model. In addition to defining the timing and frequency of prioritization, the business analyst should also define the criteria that will be used to prioritize. Requirements are prioritized based on a number of factors. Now you have to choose whichever applies to you and suits you. So you may consider any one of these following criteria or factors. Value, addressing high value requirements, which is bringing more value to the business. So that could be one factor for prioritization. Cost, evaluating requirements based on financial cost or opportunity cost. Difficulty, considering how difficult the requirement is to fulfill. Maybe you decide to go for the easier requirements first and difficult requirements later, or vice versa. Regulatory, addressing regulatory or legislative requirements that have imminent compliance deadlines first. So if you have to meet a deadline from a legislative point of view that you must have done this thing by this date, then that is imposition of that is a constraint and you have to abide by that. So it has to be prioritized earlier. Risk, implementing high risk requirements first to uncover issues early. We know that risks are high in the beginning. So if you are addressing the high risk requirements first, then more of the risk will go off and issues will surface and you will be able to manage them properly. Some common techniques for determining priority are Moscow, time boxing, multi-voting, and weighted ranking. You might have heard about most of these things, but we can talk about them. For information about conducting the prioritization process, in section 4, the requirement elicitation, we'll talk about Moscow, multi-voting, time boxing, and in need assessment already we have discussed about the weighted ranking matrix and weighted ranking approach. If you remember, we have already discussed how you will do the weighted averages, weighted ranking. So these are the various techniques which will be used for this specific purpose. After that, we define the traceability approach. You remember the traceability matrix we had to create. So traceability involves documenting requirement relationships and is used in business analysis to maintain product scope. When a traceability approach is defined and adhered to, requirement relationships are created, which allow the project team to trace backwards to identify the origin of the requirement and trace forward to identify how the requirements was tested and implemented, or trace in between requirements to provide insight into the value of group of related requirements can deliver. This traceability is like a thread. You can pick the thread from anywhere and trace backwards or forwards. So when a requirement is created, naturally it can be traced back to a stakeholder. If the stakeholder changes or his requirement, importance of the stakeholder changes, the requirement will, in a weighted average, will go down or maybe completely eliminated. Okay, when you have the requirement, later on you will develop the scope, product scope, project scope, activities, and ultimately in the monitoring and control you will be having certain tests to check if the requirement has been completed or not. There will be quality controls and other user verifications. So you see, the requirement can be traced forward to all those things. You see, if there is one requirement which is no more required, then you have to eliminate all those activities or tests which are designed only for that requirement. Because if this requirement is no more, those activities are also redundant. So requirements that are documented but fail to trace to a business need are considered out of scope. You have documented a requirement, but you can no more trace it to the business need, meaning the business need has changed, a stakeholder has changed, or something has changed, and you are just keeping that requirement for the sake of it. This is an out of scope requirement now. Requirements that fail to trace to a solution component identify areas where the product is not in compliance with the requirement. If the solution produced is not according to the requirement, then it should not be cleared. It is not in compliance. So this thread of requirements is called the traceability. When sufficient traceability is established, it is much easier for the project team to understand how a proposed change will impact the project. Those requirements affected by a change can be evaluated to understand how to change in that requirement impacts the related project components already built to satisfy the requirement or test cases already created to test the features. A sufficient amount of traceability ensures that the impacts of requirements change are properly assessed and quantified from a risk, cost, and time perspective. During planning, the business analyst should determine what level of traceability is going to be performed on the project. Higher risk or more complex projects may require more traceability. There is more need for tracking what is happening. So more traceability. Understanding the project context, the type of project, and any organizational process or compliance standard that are required, the business analyst then documents the traceability approach in the business analysis plan. Type of traceability decisions the business analyst should consider are type of requirements to be traced, how many types of requirements are to be traced, how much detailed that trace could be, the level of detail of the trace, relationship that will be established and maintained, requirement attributes to be tracked, requirement states that drive the requirement life cycle, for example, approval, deferring it, rejecting it, whatever. So the status of the requirement, where it stands right now, tools used to perform that traceability, and process decisions regarding how traceability will be established and maintained. So these are very important factors you must consider. Requirement attribute is a part of the requirement. You see, you remember the activity and activity attributes in project management. Do you remember what is an activity attribute? Okay.
Yes, sir. I can remember that.
Okay. The activity has various features, duration, this, that. So these are the components or attributes of the activity. The requirement attributes are the information about the requirement that has to be traced. So these are the requirement.
Okay. So, sir, this is not the already part of the traceability template.
Of course it should be, of course. But you see, the traceability requirements are a detail of the requirement. When you are putting it in a traceability matrix, you are saying that this is the requirement and this is the business need and this is the stakeholder and this is the activity and this is the test. So this is a thread made of all these things. So I can track it down. But it says that sometimes the requirement attributes have to be tracked to ensure that the requirement is being tracked. So rather than, tracking the requirement itself, You select an attribute of the requirement and see whether it is happening or not. It is a characteristic of the requirement which you take up and track. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as the size and complexity of the project increases, so does the complexity of the traceability. Larger, more complex projects increase the number of relationships that need to be established between the components. As the amount of traceability increases, the time and cost to manage the established linkages increase as well. To ensure the traceability approach is adequately sized for the project, the value of the process should be compared against the time and cost required to establish and support it. Risks should also be analyzed to ensure additional risks are not introduced by proposing a traceability process that increases the likelihood of missing requirements in the final product. So the basic lesson out of it is that we should not put in more effort than required. If you are spending more money in tracing a requirement rather than fulfilling a requirement, that would be a useless effort. So you must judge how much money and effort is going into tracing that requirement, and is it worthwhile? Should we be spending this much money? So in complex projects, this is very important to ascertain that are we not spending more money on traceability rather than on the requirement itself. Although traceability is important, but we have to take a strategic decision how much traceability we want to do. Similarly, it also talks about risks. Risks should also be analyzed to ensure additional risks are not introduced by proposing a traceability process. When you introduce a new traceability process that might invoke a new risk, those will have also to be identified and processed. The collaboration point here is okay. Do you want to say something?
No, sir.
Okay. I thought. Okay. Collaboration point here is the right amount of traceability helps to reduce project risk. So this sentence is very immaculate. You see, right amount of traceability. You should not be doing more traceability, unnecessarily more, or too less traceability. Right amount of traceability. If it is done, that will reduce the project risk, but too much traceability works against the project team and incurs cost and schedule impacts unnecessarily. The project team has an opportunity to collaborate and define a traceability approach that is suitable for the needs of the project. Business analysts should not define the traceability approach independently, as decisions on traceability are very interrelated to project factors that the project manager is responsible for managing. So we can say that this traceability should remain the subject of the project team, but business analysts must collaborate. Business analysts should not do it alone. That is the point. So you can read more about it in the section 5 of this book, that is traceability and monitoring. We are right now only talking about the business analysis plan. So the next step in the business analysis plan is define the communication approach. A communication approach describes how business analysis information will be structured and when communication to stakeholders will occur. The approach can be formally documented in the business analysis plan or in a separate business analysis communication plan if the project or organizational needs require this level of structure or formality. Just like in project, we do have a communication mechanism, we do have communication approach and all that, but that, as we already discussed, that is only about the project. Here we are talking about the whole business analysis approach. So business analysis will have to have its own communication because it has wider stakeholder connectivity. Business analysts should discuss the communication process with the stakeholders to ensure the approach will meet their expectations. When defining the business analysis communication approach, consider the following. Number one, types of requirements and requirement related information that will be communicated. You see, everything might not be communicated. You have to decide and select what information about the requirements needs to be communicated and to whom, who requires communication and what is communicated.
Uh, sir, can you hold for 2 minutes, please?
Of course, of course.
Sure. Thank you.
Right. Okay. We were talking about where it is. A communication approach. You were saying what are the types of requirements?
Yes, sir. We were at the communication approach.
Yeah. Who requires the communication? Stakeholder preferences for receiving the information. You see, stakeholder can have his own requirements as far as the communication are concerned. He might need a summarized report or a detailed report. So what does stakeholder ask for? Preferred delivery method for distributing or accessing requirements. Maybe you can stakeholder is satisfied if you give him online access to the information, or maybe he needs a paper report, maybe he needs to be presented in form of a presentation. Level of formality required in the communication, tools including requirement repositories which stakeholders will need to access. So all these things have to be defined in the business analysis communication approach. In addition to gaining agreement on what information will be communicated, the business analyst also receives input about how stakeholder wishes to receive information on requirement and how often they wish to receive information. For example, upper level management may request access only to requirements once the requirements are approved. Subject matter expert may request access to the requirement throughout the project. So different stakeholders will have different requirements and you need to understand those. It may not be appropriate to copy every stakeholder on each communication. That is very uneconomical way of communicating, that you are sending one communication report to everybody. Therefore, the business analyst may request the business to identify a key stakeholder representative who can serve as the recipient of the requirement related communications. The time zone and physical location of the stakeholders should be considered when defining the communication approach. If you are, calling someone and at that time, for that person, it is midnight, so it is not a good time to call. So you must take into account the cultural and time zones and geographic positioning. Location may impose constraint on the communication process as well as the tools selected to support this process. When stakeholders span across multiple time zones, which makes it difficult to have direct contact with the stakeholder, then the communication process may need to be formalized to ensure information is delivered in a clear and concise manner and can be easily understood when the practitioner is unavailable. So the collaboration point here is the business analyst should not create communication plan independently of the project manager. If the business analysis communication plan is formally documented, agreement should be reached on whether the information will be kept as a sub-plan or included within the project manager's communication plan. So they have to mutually agree on that. Then we have to define the decision-making process. Throughout the business analysis process, there are a number of decisions that need to be made before work can commence. The decision-making process should be defined collaboratively with stakeholder input. Once the team determines the decision process, it is documented within the business analysis plan so the team has a point of reference when the work begins. So they should know how our decisions are going to be made in this project. When there are differences regarding how decisions should be made, the business analyst facilitates agreement and clears up conflicting viewpoints prior to the execution of business analysis activity. A thorough understanding of the types of decisions the stakeholders will be required to make and an assessment of the authority levels in the process will save tremendous time and confusion later on when decisions need to be reached by the requirements team. So you see, if we lay out our decision-making framework, a process, then all the stakeholders will have the same expectation. For a team, it would be much easier to move on with the job. Following information can be considered when defining the decision-making process. Type of decision that will be made, including how requirements will be approved. Roles and authority levels. For example, who is involved in the discussion and who makes the decision. Process to follow when consensus cannot be reached and requirement-related issues need to be escalated. Required turnaround time for a decision to be reached. How decisions are documented and communicated, including requirement sign-offs. And any special tools and techniques that may be used to help team evaluate alternatives. For example, decision analysis, modeling, or decision trees. So what are the tools and techniques available for better decision making? जी होल्ड ऑन हाँ जी आपका माइक ऑन है
ठीक है. So my first point is related to the communication approach. Okay, so over here again we are going to follow the same formula of n into n minus 1 divided by 2.
Oh yes, that is a standard formula. That is a standard formula.
All right. And regarding the communication approach, there's a point. Preferred delivery methods for distributing and assessing requirements. What does this mean?
Which point is it?
So can you get my point?
No. Please ask again.
Third last point, it says preferred delivery methods for distributing or accessing requirements and requirement-related information. What does this mean?
required delivery method. I am not getting which point it is. Third point, fourth point.
Sir, it's the fourth point.
It says required turnaround time for a decision to be reached. This is one. Okay, turnaround time is
On this slide, communication approach.
communication. Okay, you are back in communication. Okay, fourth point, preferred delivery method for distributing and accessing requirements and requirement related information. Delivery method is how the information will travel from point A to point B. Will it be a person carrying the information, or it will be an email or whatever? How are you going to distribute this information? It can be distributed through email. It can be distributed through post. It can be distributed by manual transfer of that thing or by communicating it directly. So whatever means of transportation of communication information, that is the preferred delivery method.
Okay. My other point is that in communication approach, we have got mainly two types of communication approach. That is, one is formal and other one is informal. Informal messages, SMS, all these sort of.
Yeah.
Whereas in communication, we come up with the presentation and all that stuff. So where this type of communication approach is going to be locked? See, the points which have been mentioned over here, they are not covering these 2 points.
Okay. You generally understand what is formal and informal communication. But is it the same for every organization?
No. It can vary.
Yes. So this is the organizational decision, what they consider formal and what they consider non informal. For example, I have seen in many organizations, email is a formal communication. You see, so what is to be considered formal, what is not to be considered formal, this is all the decision of the organization. Sometimes you see the small little discussions you carry out in the, not even in the meetings, they are also considered sometimes to be formal communications.
All right. So if we talk in this way, then there must be some communication approach must be defined.
Exactly.
See,
Exactly.
what my point is that email, I'm taking it in a formal communication channel, whereas in your organization, email, you are taking it as informal communication.
Right.
So there will always be a problem at the point of conflict.
When I am doing a project for another organization, the communication channels we establish have to be mutually agreed. The communication policy of both organizations have to be studied as if what they consider email as. If one organization considers it formal, the other organization considers it informal, then we can negotiate between the organizations to define the communication approach. Maybe the consensus is that email is, for the project purposes of the project, email is not official communication. So if any one of the does not apply that, yes.
Sir, so my point is still there. Where are we going to log this thing out? Basically, in the defined communication approach?
Yeah,
in this area?
Of course, this is where you are defining everything.
Okay.
This is where you are communicating with the stakeholder and defining everything.
All right. All right.
So
move forward.
We were at the end of decision making.
Yes. Define decision making.
So we are saying,
okay. So
yes.
Okay. So okay. Can you give me a summary of this slide, decision making process, because there are so many questions are coming out of my mind related to this slide. that how we can define a process for decision making. Um, can you please give me a small, quick summary? Though whatever you have read it, I agree to it and I can understand it, but still I'm pretty shaky about this. Like, hello, hello, hello.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My mic was off. You see, this greatly
Okay.
depends upon the organization you are working for. The business analyst is part of that organization. The project is going to be part of that organization. If your organization has got a very rigid decision-making mechanism available, then you will inherit that and you will adopt that. And moreover, you also know that you have to deal with the stakeholders. So how much do you want to be firm about it? So who should carry the authority levels? Stakeholder is the is carrying the decision making authority, or whomsoever is carrying it. So this is our business analyst job to get answers to each and every of these questions. All these factors are to be included in your decision making process. For that, naturally I'll get some input from the organizational decision making process, but I have also to talk to the stakeholder. I cannot give you a single decision making model that you should just adopt that in every project. For every project, decision making process may vary. So it depends upon the type of decisions you are taking, the different roles and responsibilities, different levels you are going to be discussing. Then what exactly is the mechanism you suggest to create the consensus? If there is a conflict, if there is a misunderstanding, how are you going to resolve that? So you may have a standard procedure in your organization that whenever there is a consensus, the decision will be brought in front of this person and he will judge and his decision will be final. And then is the required turnaround time for a decision. How soon the decision should be made? You must not take more than a specific period of time for making a decision. This should also be defined specific to this project. How decisions are documented and communicated, including the requirement sign-off. And any special tools and technique for decision making, like decision trees and models and analysis and whatever we do, we already know and study that in project management also. So these are all the decision making tools. So decision making in itself is important, but like whatever we plan here, that is the business analyst point of view, and he will create something specific to the project or the requirement or the need. So you can't say that a decision making model or communication model is a standardized model. No, it is not. Next is the defined requirements verification and validation process. Again, uh, we do understand how the requirements in project management are verified and are validated. But now because we are talking specifically about the requirements and we are putting more emphasis on the requirement, so how these requirements will be verified and how they will be validated. So these are two business analysis activities that often confuse stakeholders are requirement verification and requirement validation. According to PMBOK, verification is the evaluation of whether or not a product, service or system complies with a regulation, requirement, specification or imposed condition. So if you do not understand this, we are talking about the quality control here. Verification is the evaluation of whether or not a product, service or system complies with the regulation, requirement, specification or imposed condition. So this is the verification. If it complies, if it is okay for quality, the product, then it is declared verified. Validation is the assurance that a product, service or system meets the needs of the customer and other identified stakeholders. This is called the user acceptance. Requirements are associated. Requirement models are both verified and validated. In business analysis, requirement verification is the process of reviewing requirements and models to ensure they meet quality standards. This is what I was saying. It verification has to deal is to do with the quality standards. Verification is performed to ensure the requirements are constructed properly and the models are clear enough to be used effectively. Verification activities ensure that the right product will be built. Verification can be conducted iteratively as requirements are in development. All requirement types should be verified. For example, business requirements should be verified, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, all the different kinds of requirements we had studied, each have to be verified. So all the requirements are to be verified. As far as the validation is concerned, requirement validation is the process of ensuring that all requirements accurately reflect the intent of the stakeholder and that each requirement aligns to one or more business requirements. So we are signing it off in validation. Validation is performed through the use of structured walkthroughs and traceability. Conducting a structured walkthrough provides an opportunity for the system analysts and stakeholders to collaborate and to ensure the requirement as stated is correct. Requirement validation ensures that the requirements accurately reflect what the project is expected to deliver. Validation ensures that the right product is being built. During business analysis planning, the business analyst defines how verification and validation activities will be conducted. Stakeholders often have expectations about how they want to review the requirements and therefore their input should be taken into consideration when defining these processes. Organizations may already have documented standards that identify the characteristics for good requirement. Quality standards should be defined in planning so they are known prior to the requirement development and verification activities. Just remember, verification has something to do with quality control. And validation is the user acceptance. This is the summary I am giving you. Verification processes often leverage checklists to define the quality attributes. You remember, in quality control, we always have checklists. When a checklist will be leveraged for the verification process, the business analyst ensures that the checklist is created before the verification activities begin. So it should be done in planning. Requirement validation and verification and the characteristics for quality requirements are further discussed in chapter 4 in the requirements elicitation and analysis. Next point is define the requirements change process. This is a change control process. How the requirements can change, who can allow the requirements to change, what are the conditions in which the requirements can change, etc. The requirement change process is performed differently depending on the selected project life cycle. Whatever kind of project life cycle you have used, the requirement change will depend on that. For an agile project, a lot of change is possible and it is highly flexible. For a waterfall model, predictive life cycle, it will be really very difficult to change the requirements. But yes, we do have a process there as well by which you can change the requirement. For a project following a predictive life cycle, the project team may use a formal change control process, whereas project following an adaptive life cycle may not, because adaptive life cycle is free format. Adaptive approaches expect that requirements will evolve over time and as a result often take a flexible approach to requirement change control. For projects that use a formal change control process, the business analyst should consider documenting the approach so that stakeholders know how to request a change, how changes will be assessed for impact. Changes for requirements may involve a change in scope. a restated business objective, or the addition or deletion of the features to the product or service being developed. Therefore, the business analyst will need to determine how requirement documentation should be updated once a change is approved. So if a change is approved, the plans must all be amended wherever it is impacting. Consider the following type of information when defining a requirement change control process: how requirement changes will be proposed, how changes will be reviewed, how change management decisions will be documented, how requirements change will be communicated, and how changes to requirements, models, traceability, and other requirement related information will be completed and made available once the change is approved. So I think this is pretty simple. Change process we are already very well aware of. It is only explaining it further from the business analysis point of view. The business analyst also needs to ensure the project team understands the roles and responsibilities for requirement change process. For example, who is responsible for proposing the change? Who is responsible for conducting the assessment and impact analysis? Roles that participate in the change discussion, responsibility for approving the changes. So these roles and responsibilities must be clearly defined. When there is an approved change request form or impact analysis template that should be used, this information should be included when defining the requirement change process. For information on conducting the change control process, we will talk about it in traceability and monitoring last chapter. So what is the collaboration point here? The requirement change control process may be documented by the project manager in the change management plan. When there is a need to formally document the process, the business analyst and project manager should work together to determine who takes ownership for documenting the plan and whether the business analysis plan or change management plan is the source for this information. Right. Next we have define the solution evaluation process. Once the solution has been delivered, how will and who will evaluate that? Defining the solution evaluation process identifies how a solution is evaluated during the evaluation phase, which activities will be performed and what techniques will be applied, and how information will be analyzed. Through evaluation, the business analyst determines whether a solution has achieved the desired business result. Evaluation is performed before and after a solution is implemented. When evaluation is conducted after a solution is implemented, new or changed requirements may be identified, which can lead to refinement of the solution or can generate new projects for the purpose of creating a new version of project. Project lifecycle influences the timing and frequency of the evaluation activities. The expected benefits for the product or solution were defined in the business case. The work in planning is to determine how to measure these benefits. So solution evaluation planning involves defining evaluation criteria and acceptance levels, that is the user acceptance. Qualitative and quantitative evaluation activities to be performed, how the solution will be evaluated, when and how often evaluation will be performed, that is the frequency of evaluations. Evaluation techniques that will be used, and we know evaluation techniques, we have the focus groups, observations, surveys, and these are exactly the same techniques we use in elicitation, and in evaluation again we have the same kind of techniques. Whether any special measurement tools have been required and how results will be analyzed and reported, this is what the evaluation will include. Evaluation planning. For more information on conducting the evaluation, we will talk about it in the solution evaluation chapter. Next heading is the plan the business analysis work. So as far as the business analysis work itself is concerned, so first determine who plans the business analysis work. Is it the business analyst or someone else? One point of confusion on project is the overlap that exists between business analysis planning and project management planning. The confusion over who performs what work is compounded by the fact that responsibility for business analysis planning differs across organizations. This is a big point. This is a big problem that the role of business analyst in different organizations is conceived differently. In one organization, he is interacting very closely with the project manager, and another organization, he has nothing to do with the project manager. So every organization conceives this role differently, and depending upon how that organization conceives that role, it would create a lot of confusion. We cannot define exactly how and where they should collaborate, because maybe the organization does not recognize that. So differs from across organization, across types of project, and by project methodology. Even within a single organization, the business analyst may be assigned to build the work breakdown structure for one project in order to define the business analysis work, and for a second project, the project manager may interview the business analyst to obtain the needed inputs for developing that plan. So you see, that is exactly the confusion which is time and again coming to your mind, and you are a little confused when this job is also done by project manager. So how much we have to decide when we are interacting and collaborating. Project manager and the business analyst, they have to share their duties. They have to understand what part of the job will be done by whom. The business analysis profession is progressing, isn't, and the role has become more defined over the years. Hybrid role, for example, the project manager business analyst position have existed for many years and still exist in number of organizations. So still there are many organizations who consider the project manager as a business analyst. As organizations have purposely split apart the responsibilities into two distinct roles, the practitioners who migrated into pure business analysis positions bring with them experience in project planning. When a business analyst is adept at planning, project manager may leverage that experience and request assistance for the business analyst. It is not uncommon for the business analyst on a project with a predictive life cycle to draft a work breakdown structure to conduct initial conversation with the project manager regarding the business analysis work for the project. So the collaboration point here is planning is an area where project manager and business analyst will find that their roles overlap. Ultimately, the project manager is responsible for the project management plan and is accountable for the managing all project activities, whereas business analyst can help support the project manager because the business analyst has expertise in the business analysis process and can provide specifics on the business analysis work that is recommended to meet project objectives. Other team members should be consulted and included in plan development to ensure their buy-in and engagement in the work. Then you build the business plan, analysis, work plan. Um, this business analysis work plan is a project plan that covers the work to be performed during the business analysis process. It is a plan for doing only that much job which is to be done in business analysis work. The business analyst is responsible for identifying the work using all the project and environment information known to them. For example, selected project life cycles, size of the project, known risks, organizational process assets, etc. It is critical that the project manager be included and involved as a business analyst lays out this work, because ultimately the business analysis work plan will be integrated within the project management plan. Any discrepancies or misalignment needs to be resolved before work commences. So the first step in the building of plan is identifying the deliverables that the business analyst is responsible for producing. So we identify the deliverables, then the business analyst collects many forms of information over the course of the project, but not all information collected and documented in considering to be a project objective. PMBOK says our deliverable is any unique and verifiable product result of capability to perform a service that is required to be produced to complete a process phase or project. Agendas, meeting minutes, parking lot lists, and some types of models, although necessary to organize project work and perform effectively, are not required to be produced. Yes? जी जी आपका माइक खोल दें.
So I need 2 minutes. Can you please hold on?
Okay. So we continue from here tomorrow, right? Are you going to be there on Friday?
So we can continue right now. I need only 2 minutes. So if
Okay.
you're free, I'm free as well. So we can continue.
Okay. Fine.
Right?
I'm waiting then.
Hold on. Yes, sir.
Identify the deliverable. Let me go back one slide. We started talking about building the business analysis work plan, and now we are discussing the parts of building the business analysis work plan. And it is just like developing a schedule in project management. First, you identify the deliverables, like we did the activity identification there. Then you see determine the tasks and activities. Then determine the timing and sequence. Then determining the roles and responsibilities, identifying the resources, estimate the work, and ultimately this would be the business analysis work plan. So let us take it one by one. The first thing we do here is identify the deliverable. So the business analysis collects many forms of information over the course of project, but not all information collected and documented is considered to be project deliverable. As PMBOK says, a deliverable is any unique and verifiable product, result, or capability to perform a service that is required to be produced to complete process, phase, or project. So, deliverable is anything which is coming out of any process, phase, or project could be termed as a deliverable. Agendas, meeting minutes, parking lot lists, some types of models, although necessary to organize work and perform effectively, are not required to be produced and therefore are not considered a business analysis deliverable. These items are often referred to as work products. Like, you're filling in a document. There is a result. So this is called a work product, but specific to business analysis, when we say deliverable, it means the deliverable of the business. And these work products are created in order to perform the work, but are not promised deliverable that will be tracked and managed through the project management plan. So these are not the promised deliverable जो कि हमने stakeholder को देने. During planning, business analysts should think about the work products and how they will be created, stored, assessed, and used by the project team. Planning for work products is much less formal than deliverables. Although we do not say that we will not do anything about work product, that is an important work and it has to be done. But it is less formal than the deliverable, because deliverable is something which is to be handed over to the customer, to the stakeholder. So deliverables, on the other hand, are required and often impact the work of individuals who perform activities later on in the project life cycle. These documents are usually formatted for consistency across projects and often have an approved structure or template that the business analyst is required to use. And examples of these could include, but are not limited to, high-level requirement document, software requirement specifications, user stories, business rule cataloging, non-functional requirement list. So all these documents are product deliverables. Whereas other documents like, minutes of meetings and this and that, these are the work products. While planning the deliverables for the project, the business analyst considers what type of requirements will be collected and the different deliverable formats that are required to be used. Additionally, consideration is given to the stakeholder request for receiving specific types of documentation or obtaining information in certain formats or tools. The selected project lifecycle heavily influences which deliverable will be produced as do the size and complexity of the project. So the life cycle, size and complexity of the project dictates these project deliverables. The business analyst should consider the following when planning the business analysis documentation. What deliverables will be produced? Create a list of all the deliverables. How deliverables will be used by other team members or the key stakeholders. How changes to the deliverable will be managed. What is the required formality of the deliverable? how formal it is, how deliverable will be accessed and by whom, tools that are required to produce, maintain or store deliverables, and whether requirements will be reused on future projects or not. The collaboration point here is the business analysis. Deliverables produced for the project are determined by the business analyst, but these decisions are not made independently. Business analysts solicit input from the sponsor, project manager, and key stakeholders to ensure that expectations are met. The business analyst should work closely with the project manager because deliverables impact the project schedule and can create dependencies of the other downstream project work. So here we say job is of the business analyst, but it has to be coordinated or communicated or collaborated with the sponsor, project manager and key stakeholder, because for all of them these identified deliverables are important, especially for the project manager because he has to create them. Then determine the tasks and activities according to those deliverables. As the stakeholder and project characteristics become better understood during the planning process, the business analyst considers the business analysis work that needs to be performed in order to conduct an effective business analysis process. After agreeing on the list of deliverables that will be produced to satisfy the project objectives, the business analyst begins to define the activities required to produce them. Each deliverable requires the completion of one or more activities. Naturally, this is but obvious that to create a deliverable, you have to do a set of activities. So, more than one activities are to be completed as if that deliverable can be created. The project team should work together to define the task list. Task identification is an iterative process. The business analyst may use a number of techniques to help identify a complete list, and that could be he could brainstorm, he could do decomposition, interviews, lessons learned, or a few techniques that can be used. And I hope you understand decomposition from project management. Decomposition is an analysis model used to break down a high-level object into a small, more discrete parts. Typical objects often analyzed with decomposition may be solution, scope, organizational units, work product, processes, functions, or any other object type that can be subdivided into smaller elements. So decomposition is breaking something into smaller parts and further into more and more smaller parts. A decomposition model is easy to produce and the models are easily constructed and understood by stakeholders. Decomposition models provide a way to analyze highly complex concepts because these allow for the complexity to be broken into manageable elements. The hierarchical relationships are easily portrayed through the levels. So it is very easy to, if it is a kind of a hierarchical structure, a breakdown structure, like a work breakdown structure or a organizational breakdown structure, you can see what is on top and how it is divided into how many parts, and then those parts are subdivided into what. So this is the art of decomposition. Decomposition model cannot be used to show sequence and process steps. I hope this we already know very well. There is no sequence in decomposition. As we studied WBS in project management, WBS does not show sequence. Many people are confused about it. They think that the activities shown in a hierarchical structure like WBS, they are in sequence. They are not in sequence. They are just divisions of a task. In business analysis planning, a decomposition model is
But sir,
used.
but those activities are built, are bring into the sequences later on.
Later on, all right. But some
But
people,
initially they are, yes, I agree with that.
yes,
Initially they are not in sequence, but later on the sequence of the activities are determined with the help of the functional managers.
yes, but at the same time, WBS does not contribute to the sequence. WBS
Agreed.
contributes to the activity identification, and then those activities are put in sequence. WBS is not in sequence.
Agreed.
So when conducting stakeholder analysis, a decomposition model is used to analyze the organization with the goal of discovering stakeholder groups. On IT projects, the type of model is helpful to break down solutions into solution components to further understand their features. Decomposition models are also referred to as decomposition diagrams. Then we determine the time and sequence, how much time each activity will take and what is the sequence of that activity. This comes now. So the time of business analysis task is directly influenced by the selected project life cycle. Naturally, if we are doing a adaptive cycle or a predictive cycle, the timelines will be different. Sequencing is also influenced by a natural order because some tasks require the completion of outputs produced by other activities. The business analyst analyzes these factors and may consider one or more of the following when determining the sequence of activities of the work plan. Availability of the resources, that is a critical factor because if a resource is not available and the next activity cannot be performed. So availability of resources required to perform or contribute to the work. Needs of downstream recipients whose work relies on the business analysis deliverable. So the predecessor, when we are designing, we must consider successors also. Relationship of project work to other work being performed within the organization. If there is some sequence between the activities of the project and organizational activity, that has to be established that when the organization has done this, only then this project work can be started. So naturally there is a dependency from outside of the project. Contractual or statement of work obligation. Dependencies on training and tools to perform business analysis work. Staffing and new hire needs. So if you have to staff, you have to hire new people. That will also take time and that should also include in the sequence. How soon should you be starting the effort of getting the people hired? Risk and complexity level of task will also determine in what sequence they are to be performed. Then comes the determination of the roles and responsibilities. Project managers often develop a RASI chart.
Sir, can we? Sir, sir, can we hold over here so that we can continue later on with the other slides?
Right. Okay, then I think we should call it a day then. Thank you very much for joining and take care.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, sir. Allah Hafiz.
Love.